The river's silence. Ethan Cole had grown used to silence. It filled the ranch like dust, seeping into every corner, settling in his bones. Once, this land had been alive with laughter, with music spilling from the porch when his wife danced barefoot in the twilight. But all that had vanished when betrayal came like a lightning strike, sudden, scorching, and irreversible. His wife had left with another man, and Ethan was left with cattle, empty rooms, and the kind of ache no medicine could soothe. He carried the wound of that betrayal deeper than the limp in his right leg, a rodeo injury that throbbed whenever the weather turned. The limp was visible, a physical reminder of his recklessness in younger days. But the wound in his chest was the one he guarded fiercest, the one that told him love was a trick, a lure meant to weaken a man. Each morning he worked the ranch with mechanical precision, feeding the cattle, mending fences, oiling creaky gates. Hard labor was his shield, his excuse to avoid townsfolk who whispered behind cupped hands. He answered their polite greetings with nods, but never lingered. The world beyond his land had nothing left for him, or so he believed. It was the river that kept him tethered. Flowing along the edge of his property, it offered him something the ranch could not, quiet that felt cleansing rather than suffocating. He walked there most evenings, watching the water ripple against the rocks, pretending the sound could wash away his bitterness. That was where he first saw her. At first, Ethan thought she was a mirage, some trick of dusk and his own loneliness. A young woman sat on a flat stone near the water, her skirts drawn neatly around her, a notebook resting on her lap. She leaned forward, pencil moving quickly, as though trying to capture the river's shifting colors before they slipped away. Ethan slowed, boots crunching against gravel, unsure if he should disturb her. She lifted her head, startled by the noise, and for a moment their eyes met. Her gaze wasn't the careless glance of a stranger. It lingered, curious yet cautious, as though she'd been caught trespassing. "Evening," Ethan said, his voice rough from disuse. She smiled faintly, closing the notebook as though to protect its secrets. "I didn't mean to intrude." The river looked too peaceful to ignore. Ethan studied her, dark hair pulled loosely back, a face unadorned yet softened by the golden light. His eyes drifted, unbidden, to the glint of a ring on her left hand. A married woman. He reminded himself to keep his distance. "You're not intruding," he said finally. "River doesn't belong to anyone." She seemed relieved, though a flicker of hesitation remained in her posture. "I'm Clara Hayes. Ethan Cole." He tipped his hat slightly, a gesture from habit more than courtesy. For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the murmuring river. Clara glanced at the water, then back at him, as if deciding whether to speak further. "You live near here?" she asked. Ethan nodded toward the ridge. "The ranch up there's mine." Something flickered in her expression, respect, perhaps, or pity. Ranch life was no small burden, and it showed in his weathered hands, in the set of his shoulders. But her eyes softened, not with condescension, but with a kind of understanding he hadn't felt from anyone in years. "I come here when I need quiet," she said. "My husband prefers town, but it's too noisy for me." Her words were simple, but Ethan caught the weight in them. A husband who preferred elsewhere. A woman seeking refuge alone. He felt the old instinct to retreat, to avoid entanglement. Yet something about her presence stilled the bitterness always simmering in him. The sun dipped lower, turning to river bronze. Clara rose, tucking the notebook beneath her arm. "I should go before it's dark." Ethan only nodded. Words pressed against his tongue, an offer to walk her back, a question about her sketches, but he held them in. She gave him one last, lingering look before stepping away, her figure disappearing among the trees. When she was gone, Ethan exhaled as though he'd been holding his breath the entire time. He told himself it was nothing. A chance meeting by the river. A married woman passing through. He had sworn never to let his heart wander again, never to risk the pain of betrayal. Yet that night, as he sat alone on his porch, the silence of the ranch felt different. Not as heavy, not as final. He found himself listening for the sound of rushing water and thinking of the woman with the notebook. He should have forgotten her. But already he knew he wouldn't. Whispers by the river. Ethan told himself he wouldn't return to the river the next evening. Yet when the sun began to slide toward the horizon, his boots carried him there as though they knew the path better than his will. The water glimmered in shades of silver and gold. And sure enough, she was there again. Clara Hayes, seated on the same stone, notebook balanced in her lap. This time she looked up before he could announce himself. Her smile came quickly, unforced. "Mr. Cole," she greeted. "Ethan," he corrected. "Mr. Cole makes me sound older than I am." She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that slipped under his skin and warmed something long cold. She gestured to the space beside her. "Will you sit?" He hesitated. A dozen warnings ran through his mind, about married women, about gossip in small towns, about how easily loneliness could disguise itself as desire. Yet he sat. The stone was cool beneath him, and the river hummed, as if urging the conversation forward. Clara closed her notebook, setting aside. "I hope you don't mind me coming here. I know it must feel like your land. Like I said before, river doesn't belong to anyone," Ethan replied. Then, after a pause, "What do you write in that book?" Her fingers brushed over the worn leather cover. "Sketches, thoughts. Sometimes I write when I can't say what I feel out loud." Her words carried a quiet weight. Ethan studied her profile, delicate, composed, yet shadowed by something unsaid. He didn't press. He knew the burden of unspoken truths. They spoke in fragments at first, about the changing weather, about how the river swelled in spring, about the cattle that had broken through his fence last winter. But as twilight deepened, their words grew bolder. Clara confessed she felt invisible in her own marriage. Daniel, her husband, was a man of figures and contracts, his mind consumed by business trips and investments. "He doesn't mean to be cruel," she said softly, "but sometimes I feel like a piece of furniture in his house. Useful, silent, easily overlooked." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. He knew better than to ask questions about another man's wife, but her voice trembled with loneliness, and something inside him answered. "I know what it's like," he said, "to give yourself to someone and find they never saw you at all." She turned to him, her eyes catching the last of the light. "You understand more than you admit, don't you?" He looked away, toward the river. "Maybe." Silence stretched, but was no longer awkward. It was full, alive, like a space carved only for them. Clara reached for her notebook, flipping it open. On the page was a rough sketch of the riverbank. Trees, rocks, rippling water. She had drawn a figure too, a man with broad shoulders, standing at the edge of the stream. Ethan recognized himself instantly. "Why draw me?" he asked, voice low. Clara hesitated, then closed the book again. "Because you look as if you're carrying storms no one else can see." The word struck deeper than he expected. For years, Ethan had hidden his bitterness behind labor and silence. Yet this woman, barely a stranger, saw through him with ease. It frightened him. It thrilled him. Their hands brushed when she shifted the notebook, the faintest contact, but it sent a jolt through him. She drew back quickly, cheeks flushed, though her gaze lingered on his. Distantly, a bell rang from the town, echoing across the hills. Clara rose, smoothing her skirt. "I should go. Daniel will be home soon." The mention of her husband's name was a sharp reminder, pulling Ethan back from the dangerous edge of whatever had passed between them. He stood as well, tipping his hat. "Good night, Mrs. Hayes." She paused, her expression unreadable. "Good night, Ethan." He watched her walk away, the sway of her steps graceful, deliberate. When she disappeared among the trees, he sat back on the stone, staring at the river. His chest ached with a confusion he hadn't felt in years, part longing, part dread. He told himself he wouldn't come back tomorrow. He told himself this was a path better left untrodden. But the river whispered otherwise. The storm within. The sky darkened with the weight of an approaching storm, clouds pressing low over the hills like bruises. Ethan stood on his porch, the smell of rain sharp in the air, when he saw her. Clara, skirts damp from hurried steps, appeared on the path that led from the road. She clutched her notebook to her chest, her face pale and drawn. "Clara," His voice was more startled than welcoming. She stopped at the edge of the porch, breathless. I shouldn't be here. Her words trembled, but her presence contradicted them. She had chosen this path, chosen him, though guilt clung to her every movement. Ethan stepped down, the boards creaking beneath his weight. What happened? She shook her head, unable to meet his gaze. Daniel, we argued. He said my sketches are a waste of time, that I should stop acting like a girl chasing dreams. Her lips quivered. He doesn't see me, Ethan. Not really. The confession cut into him, sharper than any blade. He knew invisibility, the hollow of being unwanted. And now, seeing her trembling in the gathering storm, he felt something stir. Anger for her pain, longing for her closeness. Come inside, he said. You'll be soaked out here. She hesitated, but the wind carried the first drops of rain, and she followed him into the cabin. The air inside smelled faintly of wood smoke and leather. It was spare but warm, a place built for survival rather than comfort. Clara stood in the center, her hands twisting around the notebook. You shouldn't have come, Ethan said quietly, though every fiber in him was glad she had. Her eyes lifted to his, luminous with unshed tears. Then why does it feel like I belong here more than anywhere else? The storm broke outside, rain hammering the roof. In that cocoon of sound, their restraint shattered. Ethan moved closer, drawn by a force he could neither name nor fight. Clara didn't step back. Instead, she tilted her face upward, her breath shallow, her eyes searching his as though begging for permission. He gave none. He simply lowered his head, and their lips met. The kiss was hesitant at first, the brush of two souls testing the fire. But hunger, long denied, flared quickly. Clara's fingers clutched at his shirt, pulling him closer. Ethan's hands framed her face, rough palms trembling as though afraid she might vanish. When at last they parted, she pressed her forehead against his chest, breathing hard. We shouldn't, she whispered. I know, he answered, though his arms tightened around her. But I can't stop. The storm raged, echoing the turmoil inside them. They spoke little, their silence heavier than words. Clara's guilt hovered, but her desire was stronger. For Ethan, the kiss had cracked open the walls he'd built, letting light pour into the spaces betrayal had darkened. They sat together on the edge of the bed, not in reckless passion, but in a desperate need for closeness. He brushed damp hair from her cheek. She traced the scar along his jaw with trembling fingers. Each touch was both comfort and sin, healing and wound. Clara finally pulled away, rising unsteadily. I have to go before he notices. Ethan stood too, though his body screamed to hold her longer. Clara, his voice faltered. He wanted to beg her to stay, to choose him, but he knew the weight of vows and the cost of breaking them. She moved toward the door, pausing as thunder rolled. This, whatever this is, we can't pretend it didn't happen. He met her eyes, steady despite the storm. No, we can't. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she slipped into the rain, her figure blurring against the curtain of water. Ethan watched until she disappeared, the ache in his chest sharper than any wound he'd carried before. When the door closed, the cabin felt emptier than ever. The storm outside raged on, but inside, silence settled. Heavy, knowing, irrevocable. Ethan sank into a chair, running a hand over his face. The line had been crossed. What began as stolen glances by the river had become something undeniable. He could no longer fool himself into thinking he was merely offering her company. He wanted her, fully, fiercely, dangerously. Yet with that want came dread. He had tasted betrayal before. Now he was part of it. The storm eased toward dawn, the rain softening to a whisper. Ethan sat awake through the night, staring at the embers in the hearth. His heart warred with his conscience, but one truth burned clear. Clara Hayes had awakened something he thought long dead. And for that, he knew, neither of their lives would remain unchanged. Choices at dawn. The days after the storm passed in uneasy silence. Ethan worked the ranch with renewed vigor, trying to drown the memory of Clara's lips, her touch, her whispered confession. But every fence post he drove, Every horse he saddled echoed with her presence. Desire had carved its mark, and no labor could erase it. Clara, too, could not stay away. She came to the river when the afternoons stretched long and her husband was gone on business. They spoke little of the kiss, but its shadow lingered in every glance. In every moment their hands brushed. Their bond deepened not in words, but in the space between them, a space charged with hunger and guilt. One evening, Clara arrived late, her notebook clutched like a shield. The sky was streaked with the red of fading light, and Ethan felt the heaviness in her step before she even spoke. "Daniel suspects something," she admitted, voice low. "He hasn't said it outright, but I see it in the way he watches me, as though he's waiting for me to stumble." Ethan stiffened. He had braced cattle storms, fires, and betrayal itself, but the idea of being the shadow behind another man's wife filled him with unease. "Then maybe you shouldn't come here anymore," he said. The words cut his throat on the way out. Clara's eyes widened, stricken. "Is that what you want?" Ethan shook his head, torn. "What I want and what's right are two different things. You belong to him." Her face tightened with pain. "Do I? Or do I belong to a marriage that suffocates me? A house where I'm nothing but silence and service?" She stepped closer, her hand trembling as it reached for his. "Ethan, with you I feel alive. For the first time in years, I remember who I am." Her plea nearly broke him. His heart roared for her, but his conscience reminded him of promises broken before. He had been the betrayed once. Now he risked becoming the betrayer. "Clara," he said softly, pulling her hand to his chest, "you deserve more than stolen moments. You deserve love that doesn't have to hide." She looked away, tears glimmering in the dim light. And yet here we are. The river gurgled beside them, relentless in its flow, a witness to their torment. Ethan realized then that they stood at a crossroads. If they continued, they would be swept deeper into betrayal, drowning in it. If they ended it, they would both walk away scarred but perhaps spared greater ruin. Clara's voice broke the silence. "I can't leave Daniel. Not for you. Not for anyone. It would destroy my family. And the shame." She trailed off, shaking her head. "But I can't bear to lose what we have either." The words sealed their fate. Ethan saw the truth in her eyes. She loved him, but not enough to break free. He was her refuge, not her choice. Something inside him hardened, not in anger, but in clarity. He stepped back, releasing her hand. "Then this has to end." Her breath hitched, as if he'd struck her. "Please don't say that. If we keep going, it'll consume us both. You'll resent me for what I cost you, and I'll hate myself for being a shadow in your life." His voice wavered, but he forced it steady. "I care for you too much to let that happen." Clara pressed her notebook against her chest, as though it could hold her together. "So this is goodbye?" He nodded slowly. "By the river, at least. Maybe one day you'll find me again, when you're free. Until then, we can't." Tears slid down her cheeks, and she turned away, her figure blurring against the darkening path. Ethan stood motionless, letting the ache settle deep, heavier than the limp in his leg, heavier than all the years of betrayal. Yet beneath the grief was a fragile thread of strength. For the first time since his wife had left, he knew he could love again. The wound was no longer empty. It had been filled, tested, broken open, and left raw, but it was alive. Clara had reminded him of that. As night fell, Ethan lingered by the river, listening to its steady rush. The water carried her memory downstream, yet he knew the current of his life had shifted. He would go on, scarred, longing, but not hollow. The river had taken much from him, but it had also returned something precious, the knowledge that his heart still beat strong enough to risk again. He turned back toward the ranch, the sky heavy with stars. Tomorrow would bring more work, more silence, more trials. But now he faced them with a flicker of hope. And somewhere, perhaps, Clara Hayes was looking at the same night sky, her notebook pressed to her chest, wondering if she had chosen safety over the one man who truly saw her.